Giuliani now maintaining that the president never had a conversation with James Comey about Michael Flynn.
They can say it's perjury if they elect to believe Comey instead of Trump.
I think Omarosa has undercut her own credibility. This is a White House where everybody lies. You have to have your own back.
Anti-racist protesters vastly outnumbered the white supremacist protesters.
He's got to do better than that. He's got to address racist-type acts.
The best he can do is put out a tweet. This is a time to take sides.
Alyssa's mother says her 18-year-old daughter was medically kidnapped.
They knew everything, and we didn't.
Did you want out of the Mayo Clinic?
As bad as possibly is.
This is New Day with Allison Camerata and John Berman.
Good morning. Welcome to your new day. Allison is off. Erica Hill joins me, which is awesome on this Monday.
It's John Berman.
Makes Monday worthwhile.
Well, you know, you're making my Monday worthwhile.
You're just saying
it's just
that.
A happy morning.
You're just saying that because you have to. This morning, a glaring case of revisionist history. Rudy Giuliani contradicting Rudy Giuliani, telling CNN that President Trump never discussed National Security Advisor Michael Flynn with then FBI Director James Comey. Of course, James Comey testified under oath that conversation happened. And it was just a month ago that Giuliani himself clearly said the president had asked Comey to give Flynn, quote, a break in an Oval Office meeting before he fired Comey.
President Trump's inner circle also a major focus on this Monday morning. Remember when the president said this on the campaign trail?
We're going to make America great again. We're going to use our best people.
I'm going to get the best people.
We're going to deliver. We're going to get the best people in the world.
We don't want people that are B level, C level, D level. We have to get our absolute best.
One of it's tough to forget.
I do remember that now that you mention it.
It was driven home several times. One of the people he hired, one of the absolute best, is a White House aide, former Apprentice star Omarosa Newman. She is now promoting her new tell-all memoir with some explosive claims. So what does the president think now?
Do you feel betrayed by Omarosa, sir?
Low life. She's a low life.
The president making that comment before Omarosa released secretly recorded audio from inside the White House Situation Room. Audio she claims is the moment Chief of Staff John Kelly fired her. She also says she refused to accept hush money to stay silent after leaving the White House. So how will the president and the White House respond today? Let's begin our coverage with CNN's Boris Sanchez, who is live in New Jersey near the president's Bedminster, easy for me to say, residence. Boris, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Erica. Rudy Giuliani, the president's attorney, is insisting that this is all just a misunderstanding. He's attributing what he calls confusion to a device used in legal argumentation known as arguing in the alternative. He says the president never had a conversation with James Comey about Michael Flynn, though he didn't quite make that clear in previous statements. Meantime, the White House is responding to these astounding claims and this recording by Omarosa, something that could lead her to very serious charges. Rudy Giuliani is again changing his story, now saying President Trump will deny ever telling FBI Director James Comey to ease up on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
The president says he never told Comey that he should go easy on Flynn. If he goes in and testifies to that under oath, instead of just this being a dispute, they can say it's perjury if they elect to believe Comey instead of Trump.
But just a month ago, Giuliani said the exact opposite.
He didn't direct him to do that. What he said to him was, can you give him a break?
Comey says he took it as direction.
Well, that's okay.
Comey has always insisted Trump asked him to take it easy on Flynn and says he has the contemporaneous notes to prove it. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI and is cooperating with the special counsel's investigation. Giuliani later backtracking, claiming he was repeating Comey's words, not the president's.
The conversation never took place. But if it did take place, and here's the conversation that's alleged, it is not illegal to have said that.
All of this comes as former White House aide Omarosa Newman releases a recording that she secretly made inside the White House Situation Room back in December when Chief of Staff John Kelly fired her.
If we make this a friendly departure, we can all be, you can look at your time here in the White House as a year of service to the nation, and then you can go on without any type of difficulty in the future relative to your reputation.
Omarosa, who is promoting her controversial tell-all book about her year in the White House, says the recording was the only way to defend herself.
The Chief of Staff of the United States, under the direction of the President of the United States, threatening me on damage to my reputation and things getting ugly for me. That's downright criminal.
The White House is slamming the recording as a national security breach. The president not mincing words about his former aide.
Do you feel betrayed by Omarosa, sir?
Lowlife. She's a lowlife.
Omarosa was the last African American to work in a high-level position in the White House. When pressed to name another, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway could not.
What does that say to have not a single senior advisor in the West Wing who's African American?
I didn't say that there wasn't, but hold on.
Who is?
There are plenty of people. If you're going by that and not by the actions of the president, which you probably should, then you should look at the fact that we have a number of different minorities.
Now, there are other aspects to this Omarosa recording that lead to very serious questions, not just how she was able to record in what is supposed to be a secure setting, but also why did John Kelly feel it was necessary to take Omarosa into the Situation Room to dismiss her? And further, what was he talking about in that recording when he referred to very serious integrity issues that she may have committed? I asked the White House about this. John and Erica, they have yet to respond.
All right, Boris Sanchez, we'll put those questions to Mark Short, who worked in the White House at that time, in just a little bit. In the meantime, I want to bring in CNN chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, CNN senior political reporter Nia Malika Henderson. Counselor Jeffrey, to you first on Rudy Giuliani, who now is contradicting Rudy Giuliani on what was discussed between President Trump and James Comey. Interesting for a lawyer to do so.
Well, it is interesting, but it's also, I think, consistent with what a lot we've seen from Giuliani lately, which is what he calls arguing in the alternative, which means just giving people choices about what to believe. Here, he says, well, you could believe that this conversation never took place, or if the conversation with Comey took place, it wasn't a criminal act by the president. I mean, this is how he's made the similar point about collusion. There was no collusion, but if there was collusion, it wasn't criminal. I mean, these are arguments that are essentially not, they're designed to give the president's supporters a variety of choices, not so much to persuade people of any one in particular. It's just like anything, any way you look at the evidence, it helps the president.
Does the truth figure anywhere in this?
You know, that's the problem with arguing in the alternative. Lawyers argue in the alternative in courtrooms all the time, but here in a public setting, you know, people are not lawyers. They are ordinary people, and they just want to know what happened. And when you argue in the alternative, it can sound a little legalistic.
Yeah, that's why I would like to call it a choose your own adventure.
It's
less legalese.
Yes.
Just a thought. When we look at this, though, politically and how it's playing, look, we know that there are people who have already made up their minds about this investigation, which we have no idea what they're actually looking at. We really don't, because we don't know how broad it is at this point. We don't know when it's going to end. These are the details some people would like to ignore. But when we look at this, Nia Malika, and we look at where we are, and when you have Rudy Giuliani putting out these options, essentially, are we at a point where we can tell whether this is starting to help or hurt Republicans? Because we sort of know where the president's supporters are, but as we're moving toward November and Rudy Giuliani is bringing up the midterms, how is it playing?
You know, we don't know. I mean, we obviously have sort of the evidence of these elections, the primaries, the president strong, obviously, with his base and able to pull people across the line that he endorses in primaries. The special elections, a bit of a mixed bag. And you see voters really acting differently in terms of the way they behaved in 2016. Suburban, white, kind of college-educated voters kind of fleeing the Republican Party. And you saw that in this last special election in Ohio. Rudy Giuliani is starting to argue that, listen, you've got to put Republicans in office, keep Republicans in office if you want to prevent this president from being impeached. You have sort of fringe Democrats talking about impeachment as well, people like Tom Steyer, but it's certainly not a major argument of any of the leadership or many of the candidates either. And we don't know. We don't know when Mueller is going to release something. You hear Giuliani obviously saying, oh, he's got to release it by September 1st. That's not really true. So we'll see how this plays out. I think think the big thing will be in November. We don't know what's going to happen. We have signs of a wave. We have signs that Giuliani, on the one hand, thinks this will hurt. On the other hand, he thinks somehow it will help if he draws it out. So he's basically doing, kind of playing both sides at this point.
All right, Jeffrey Toobin, I want to shift gears to Omarosa. Our friend Maggie Haberman at the New York Times just reported that the White House believes there could be dozens of tapes made by Omarosa. We've heard one, which is the recording of her getting fired by Chief of Staff John Kelly. The White House apparently believes there may be dozens of recordings that she made. Maggie also reports, incidentally, that she's got information that there were other recordings made by other people who worked in the West Wing. My reaction to that is, wow.
Wow, indeed. I mean, I don't even think you tape your colleagues at CNN in your private conversations.
Not as far as you know.
Not as far as I know. But no, it obviously is a very strange workplace, the West Wing of the White House. And, it raises the question of, if the president believes Omarosa is now a lowlife, what kind of judgment does it show that he hired her in the first place and spoke so highly of her? And what does she know? That, the tape itself with John Kelly, there's nothing particularly outrageous about anything that Kelly says. The question is, why was she taping in the first place? And how can you run a workplace in the single most secure place in the United States where people are taping each other in the Situation Room? I mean, when you go into the Situation Room, you're supposed to surrender your cell phones, put them in a locker. I mean, what kind of workplace allows this kind of craziness to take place?
Well, she also made the point that the reason the conversations were taped were because this is a White House where everybody lies. That from Omarosa. I mean, Omarosa, not exactly known for, for standing as a moral compass in some cases, but when that's the reasoning that's being given too, you can't ignore that. You also can't ignore, are there legal ramifications here, Jeffrey?
I doubt it. I don't know. I mean, she worked there. It is a employment custom to turn in your cell phone when you go into this Situation Room. I don't think it's a legal requirement, but I think it's indicative of a pretty crazy and disorderly workplace. That, first of all, that she worked there in the first place, how she behaved when she was there, and what she's done since she's left.
Nia, again, the best people. We played that amazing montage at the beginning there of how the president claims he would hire the best people. Omarosa was a reality show contestant, among other things. That's how the president knew her. In some ways, what's happening is the least surprising development you could conceive based on how her employment went.
I think that's right. I mean, she is probably one of the best reality show contestants in reality show history, right? And you imagine if you are Donald Trump, you see in Omarosa something of a kindred spirit. I mean, they both used to be Democrats. They both obviously made their way to the White House on the back of reality TV show. They both understand the media landscape. They both have a somewhat slippery relationship with the truth. They also are very dramatic, and they know how to put on a show. I mean, that's what has struck me about these last couple of days and seeing this rollout. She really, I think, has captured people's imagination. The first interview on Meet the Press, she'll be on the Today Show at some point. So yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that if you're Donald Trump, you want someone like Omarosa, because they have been in each other's lives for years. I think she was on 3 different versions of his reality show, and he complimented her at some point. He said, listen, you're one of the reasons that I'm so famous, because she was so instrumental in those first seasons of the reality show, The Apprentice. And so in some ways, no surprise that she was there, and no surprise that it ended in such a spectacular way.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the idea of one of the greatest reality show contestants of all time. Is there like a Hall of Fame to have, if you're in Survivor, in
We're going to have that debate in the 8 o'clock hour.
The Bachelorette,
it reminds
Hall
me
of Fame.
16 Candles, the Anthony Michael Hall comment. King of the Dip blanks. Well, I guess that's kind of cool. He tells Molly Ringwald. Jeffrey Toobin, Nia Malika Henderson, thanks so much. I will note, as much as there are people laughing at all this, we're talking about the West Wing of the White House. We're talking about the White House where the decisions for this country are made. And if this stuff is going on, it raises serious questions.
It does raise serious questions, and to your point, that's why we're discussing it. It's yes, you can have a little fun with it, but there is very serious stuff happening here. Also want to bring you up to speed here on breaking news. North and South Korea announcing plans to hold another summit. This would be the third meeting between both nations since relations have thawed. CNN's Will Ripley, who has traveled to North Korea more than a dozen times, joining us now with more. Well, good morning.
Hi, Erica. We learned overnight that the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, will travel to Pyongyang sometime in September. The date has not been officially announced yet, but this is a big deal. It's the first time that a South Korean president will travel to Pyongyang in more than a decade, since 2007. And it comes at a time that the relations between North and South Korea seem to be warming up, but relations with North Korea and the U.S. have really hit a standstill at the moment. Denuclearization talks have ground to a halt. Last week, North Korea put out that statement at the United Nations blasting the U.S., saying that the U.S. is not moving on sanctions relief and a peace treaty, and that North Korea could potentially walk away from denuclearization talks, although North Korean officials have also hinted to me that they are hoping for a second summit later this year with President Trump. Now, we know that President Moon of South Korea often has served as an intermediary during this process. The last time he met with Kim Jong-un, he flew immediately to Washington. He briefed President Trump before his historic summit in Singapore in June. So could this second summit sometime in November, this third summit rather, sometime in November between Moon and Kim Jong-un be laying the groundwork for yet another meeting later in the year with President Trump, John? We have to watch very closely at what comes next.
All right, Will Ripley, you are watching very closely, and we're very glad for that. Good to have you there. Omarosa says she needed to record conversations in the White House because, quote, everyone lies. Mark Short worked in the White House with Omarosa. He joins us next. Don't go anywhere.
A Safe Flight Auto Blast.
The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, now claims that the president never asked former FBI Director James Comey to drop an FBI investigation into Michael Flynn, but that's not what he said a month ago. Here's how Jake Tapper confronted Giuliani with his own words.
The president says he never told Comey that he should go easy on Flynn. Comey says the president did. He put it in his memo. If he goes in and testifies to that under oath, instead of just this being a dispute, they can say it's perjury if they elect to believe Comey instead of Trump.
How is he a good witness for the president if he's saying that the president was asking him, directing him, in his words, to let the Michael Flynn investigation go?
He didn't direct him to do that. What he said to him was, can you give him a break?
Comey says he took it as direction.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I've taken it that way. I mean, by that time, he had been fired.
So
well,
he didn't direct him to. What he said was, can you give a break? You said that. I mean,
I said it, but I also said before that I'm talking about their version of it. Look, lawyers argue in the alternative. I know it's complicated, but my goodness, we've been over it long enough that, I mean, why would I say something that isn't true?
Well, he said two things. He said two completely different things. Let's discuss with Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He serves on the House Intelligence Committee. Which one of those things do you believe to be true, Congressman?
Well, there's no question, and I know this from having read the contemporaneous memos that Jim Comey wrote, as well as having spoken with Jim Comey, that Jim Comey was pressured by the president in a one-on-one dinner in the White House to go easy on Flynn. Now, did he use the exact words, drop the investigation? I don't think necessarily, and maybe that's where Giuliani is working this, but as you pointed out, he's contradicting himself. And there's no question, remember, this is the President of the United States in the White House being pretty clear with the director of the FBI about what he wanted. So I just don't know where Giuliani's stories are coming from.
Well, his new story appears to be that no conversation happened, period. Another argument would be that James Comey's version of the story isn't the president's version of the story. Rudy Giuliani, as the president's lawyer, could argue that the president has a different memory of what was discussed. He seems to be arguing that nothing was discussed.
Well, two things to remember, John. Number one, remember there were two at least conversations in which the president deliberately cleared the room to have a conversation with Jim Comey. One of those, of course, is at Trump Tower before the inauguration when there's been this briefing in which the president cleared the room. The second, of course, and I think there may have even been a third, is the dinner, where Jim Comey arrives at the White House to discover that the dinner is, in fact, just a table for two. So we know the president on at least 2 or 3 occasions set up situations where there was no one else in the room but him and Jim Comey. And then we have the memoranda that Jim Comey wrote contemporaneously, in some cases right after having those meetings, and the conversations that Jim Comey had with his senior staff at the FBI. So, you know, if there were 2 people in the room and there were no recording devices, we may never know for sure. But, you know, when you look at the bulk of the facts, it does not look good for the president.
Rudy Giuliani says that the president will not do an interview with Robert Mueller after September 1st because it is too close to the election. Do you think that Mueller should say no interview after September 1st as well? Do you believe it would be inappropriate for the president to be interviewed between September 1st and November?
Well, I guess I've got 2 things to say about that, John. Number one, Rudy Giuliani and no defendant and no suspect and no target gets to tell prosecutors how they run their investigations. That's true of you, me. That's true of the 2-bit drug dealer standing on the corner. And it's true of the President of the United States. Nobody is above the law. Number 2, if we learned one thing from the whole Comey announcement of the investigation into Hillary Clinton, and then the investigation was over, and then the investigation was back, was that the Department of Justice generally and the FBI cannot factor in the timing of elections in how and when they make certain moves. So my hope is, first of all, that Mueller is allowed to continue his investigation unimpeded, and secondly, that he does it on the timetable that is important, not to his version of not affecting the election, because people could have different versions, but actually getting the truth out there in a competent way.
The tradition inside the Justice Department, the guidelines, this is not written law, are that they try to avoid doing things that would influence politics before an election. There's no set timetable there, but that is the tradition. Do you think that is the tradition that should be followed?
Well, again, it's a case-specific thing, so it's hard to know. Remember, the President of the United States is not on the ballot in November. This is not a presidential election. This is a congressional and senatorial and local election. So, again, I would hope the bias within the FBI and within the investigation would be to do their work without trying to game out how something may or may not affect the election. That, of course, was Jim Comey's mistake. He violated protocol. Look, and I respect Jim Comey. I think he's a good man. I think he made a mistake in deciding he was going to try to figure out what would be the least impactful way of announcing and conducting an investigation. And my hope would be, particularly since the president is not on the ballot, that Robert Mueller would continue his investigation in the way he thinks is best to get at the truth.
Congressman, you are part of a bipartisan election security bill. Always love to hear the word bipartisan in front of anything these days. Explain to me what you're trying to get past.
Yeah, no, it's just the fact that it is bipartisan is a good thing because, of course, we've heard ambiguity out of the White House about, who attacked us and whether the Russians did it and all that good stuff. But Tom Rooney and I, we are the chairman and the ranking member, respectively, of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee of Intelligence, have put forward a bill that would be a small part of the overall effort of providing the resources and providing the kinds of communication and propagation of best practices that would allow us to have more confidence than we do today in the security of knowing that the Russians couldn't do what they did to us again in November of 2016. Time for another cup of coffee. And give us confidence that our elections are not hackable.
I do not believe the Russians have been accused of swaying the election of Woodrow Wilson, although we will look into that at the break. Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, thanks so much for being with us. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Erica?
Omarosa Manigault-Newman just releasing a new conversation she says she had with President Trump the day after she was fired. We will play that for you next.
There's no limit to what you can achieve. And now there's no limit to how. Introducing Purdue University.
This is CNN Breaking News.
All right, we do have breaking news. Omarosa Manigault-Newman has released new audio of a phone call she says she had with the President of the United States the day after she was fired by Chief of Staff John Kelly. Listen to this.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody, wow. They run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it.
All right, this comes a day after Omarosa released a secret recording of her conversation with Kelly the day he fired her. That meeting was inside the White House Situation Room. And the New York Times is reporting this morning that the White House believes there could be dozens of Omarosa tapes. Joining me now is Mark Short, President Trump's former White House Legislative Affairs Director, now a CNN political commentator. Welcome to CNN, Mark. Great to have you here on New Day. I'm sure this is exactly how you always envisioned being welcomed here, with a tape from someone who worked at the White House, Omarosa, from the day after she was fired, a recording of a phone call she had with the President of the United States. Your reaction to hearing that?
Well, I guess my reaction is whether the President was aware or not, it seems that General Kelly made the right call there.
Do you think there's something odd or unusual about taping a phone call with the President of the United States?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it's odd and unusual. And it's, I think in the beginning of the administration, there were concerns about people having phones inside the Oval Office. And General Kelly, I think, implemented a more stringent and appropriate protocol there. But I think the more shocking one actually is the Situation Room, because when you walk in the Situation Room, you have career national security officials, often those who are still active military, who ask you, do you have any phone or any device that needs to be turned into lockers right here next to you as you walk in the door? So the fact that she would have brought in a recording device into such a secure facility, I think is an extreme breach of protocol.
I want to get to the Situation Room in just a moment, but just to stick on the phone call here, do you find it surprising that the President didn't seem to know that an assistant to the President, which is a high-level position in the White House, had been fired the day before?
I would think so. I mean, I think that General Kelly, as Chief of Staff, has broad discretion about staffing decisions, but I would imagine that he would have had a conversation with the President on that front. But as I said, either way, it's apparent that it's true that General Kelly made the right decision as far as personnel decisions there with Omarosa.
Omarosa says she felt the need to record people, and again, we'll get to the Situation Room in a second, and I don't know if she's including the President here the day after she was fired, but she felt the need to record people because there were so many lies being told inside the White House.
I never recorded anybody, John. I certainly trust the people I worked with inside the White House. I view many of them as friends, and certainly think that there were many dedicated public servants working there.
Maggie Haberman reports there could be dozens of Omarosa tapes. Do you have concerns about what might be on those tapes?
Well, of course. I mean, anytime you're assistant to the President, you're recording conversations that should be private conversations. So naturally you'd have concerns, but I have no way of knowing whether there are or not, or what's possibly on those tapes.
Why would General Kelly bring Omarosa into the Situation Room to fire her?
Yeah, I don't know why choosing that location, but I think that probably are concerns about some elements of public firing of Omarosa, but why he chose that room, I don't know. Again, I think the bigger breach of protocol is bringing a recording device into the Situation Room in the first place.
And again, explain to us exactly what happened. Someone would have asked her directly.
Every time I was in the Situation Room, yes, there are two different entrances, and there's a national security official at each door, and there's a series of cubby holes where you can put in any of your phones or personal devices. You're actually asked not to bring any down in the first place. But just as a final reminder, if you walk in the door with one, they say, are you sure there's no personal devices? If so, here's a key and a locker, please lock them up. So to actually, I think they would have required not just willful disobedience to that, but actually lying to one of those people at the desk who asked for any sort of recording device.
To your knowledge, do you think that a law was broken in that process?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure there's a legal precedent there, but certainly there is I think a significant national security concern.
Is Omarosa Manigault Newman the best people? President Trump always said he was going to hire the best people. Is she the best people?
You know, I think that Omarosa had served previously in the Clinton White House. She's somebody who had experience working in the White House. She was there to help with outreach and did work with historically black colleges and universities. But, you know, look, at the end of the day, John, we all make personnel mistakes too. And I think that that's one that you can consider a personnel mistake. I do think, you know, that there's plenty of hardworking public servants in the White House who unfortunately will all be, you know, tainted by having somebody who showed bad discretion.
Just a personnel mistake? Does that really encapsulate what happened here? You have someone whose relationship with the president seems to be as a reality show star. And then with Sarah Sanders, look, Sarah Sanders is understandably upset. I think everyone in the White House is understandably upset that Omarosa Manigault-Newman was recording things, particularly in the Situation Room. But should they be surprised based on what her relationship was with the president prior to that?
Yeah, I think we're all surprised, John. I think to have the gall to actually bring a recording device in the Situation Room is pretty significant. So yeah, I don't think anybody would have assumed that. Absolutely not.
Axios is reporting this morning that people inside the West Wing, inside the White House, were afraid of Manigault-Newman. Do you believe that to be true?
I don't know that that's the case or not. I think that certainly she had her own relationship with the president that predated many people joining the campaign, and so there's certainly a respect there, but I'm not sure that there was the same level of intimidation.
What was the nature of that relationship? Help us understand what that relationship was. And I ask even now, because we now hear this recording where the president of the United States clearly is comfortable talking to Omarosa about something that happened with the chief of staff. They seem to have a relationship that transcended the official chain of command.
I don't know that it transcended the chain of command. I think it predated that chain of command is a fair thing to say. I do think that the president enjoys having his own individual relationships with his assistants. Candidly, John, I did not work very much with Omarosa. My interactions with her were always cordial. We had different portfolios, different responsibilities, so it's a little bit hard for me to say here's how people felt about working with Omarosa, but you know, I think that clearly this is a pretty significant breach of trust.
Yeah, no, look, I have to tell you, I heard the recording. It is not often you hear a recording made with the President of the United States. It was surprising to hear a former White House staffer record a conversation with that. That, to me, is fairly shocking that it happened at all. Also shocking the President didn't seem to know she was fired. But let me also ask you about something the President wrote over the weekend about the Attorney General. He says our AG is scared, stiff, and missing in action. I want to ask you, again, you dealt with legislative affairs, but you deal with members of Congress. And every time the president writes something like that, the members of Congress we speak to cringe. They don't love, generally speaking, they don't love when he goes on the attack like that. What was your reaction when you were in the White House when he would say things like that?
Well, I think that the president still has an enormous amount of frustration with an investigation that he certainly views as a witch hunt. I think you have to keep in mind historic, I think, challenges in this investigation going back to enormous bias that was shown by agents that were sexting with each other, with those who said they would stop the president, with an assistant attorney general receiving contributions from Clinton allies, with now deputy assistant attorney general whose wife was working for Fusion GPS that sold the Steele dossier, the Clinton campaign. So all that is backdrop, John, to an enormous frustration the president has is saying, what is going on at the Department of Justice? And so I think that he's one to share his feelings directly with the American people, and that's how he's doing it.
Well, look, the president can fire the attorney general, ask him to leave if he wants to. And you were talking about Bruce Orr, who does work in the Justice Department, whose wife apparently worked for Fusion. As far as we know, Bruce Orr had nothing to do with any of the FISA applications, correct?
John, I think that could be the case, but I think the reality is that there's been enormous bias that's been demonstrated throughout this investigation. I think that's an enormous source of frustration for the president. I do think your question about how people react differently on Congress, I think for me, the House members, they want to do their own investigation. They've been frustrated that they feel the Department of Justice has not shared enough documents with them. So they're fueling some of this. On the Senate side, I think there's a much greater concern that says if we had to replace Attorney General, it would be a very difficult confirmation battle, particularly in the midst of a Kavanaugh battle. So there's a greater concern on that side, probably.
There's no doubt about that. Mark Short, thanks so much for being with us. I do have the sense, Mark, that this conversation between us was recorded. Just so we're, fully honest with each other there. Really appreciate it and welcome.
Appreciate it.
Erica?
I may post this conversation later online, just so you know. You've been warned.
Thank you very much.
What is the state of race in America in the era of President Trump? A CNN reality check is next. Time for a CNN reality check. As the nation marks 1 year since the deadly riots in Charlottesville, we're taking a closer look at the state of race in this country. Senior political analyst John Avlon joins us now with a reality check. John?
Thanks, Erica. So 1 year after the deadly Charlottesville protest, here's the good news. This weekend's attempted sequel, dubbed the Unite the Right 2, was a total bust. Protesters vastly outnumbered the few marchers, but the searing experience of seeing white nationalists on parade in the shadow of Confederate statues 1 year ago, well, it revealed an ugly underbelly to American politics, and it's growing. Now, President Trump tweeting Saturday that he condemns all types of racism, but again failing to unconditionally condemn white nationalists. And whether Trump wants to or not, he's attracting a disturbing number of them to his side. Now, remember that the office of president is primarily a place of moral leadership. But poll numbers show that just under half of all Americans believe this president is racist. Now, in Illinois, North Carolina, and Washington State, avowed white nationalists, some with explicitly Nazi beliefs, are running on the Republican line, to the understandable discomfort of party leaders who issued a statement calling such beliefs repulsive. In Virginia, Senate candidate Corey Stewart has repeatedly praised the Confederacy, as CNN's K-File and others have shown. Now, this all comes as a noticeable creep of dog whistle or racist dog whistles are infecting the mainstream. Let's just take this from Laura Ingraham.
It does seem like the America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like.
On a major American news network, folks, that isn't a dog whistle. That's a bullhorn. Or, as our own Van Jones put it,
that does not sound like anything but white nationalism, with no even pretense that there was some other dog whistle. This is, you're seeing now mainstream media adopting the rhetoric and the rationale of white nationalism.
Now, Ingraham later said her comments had nothing to do with race or ethnicity. But white supremacists, including Klan leader David Duke, hailed her comments. Well, they seemed to think they knew exactly what she was talking about. Well, all this is reflected in one of the most disturbing dynamics beneath political polarization, and that's race. Since 1994, according to Pew Research, the percentage of African-American voters who identify as solidly Republican has declined in half, from 6% to just 3%. The diversity gap between Republican and Democratic congressional coalitions is almost as stark, with just 3 African-American Republican members of Congress, Senator Tim Scott and Representatives Mia Love and Will Hurd, compared with 45 African-American Democrats. And just yesterday, Kellyanne Conway had trouble naming any African-American senior aides to the president with offices in the West Wing.
Who is the most prominent high-level advisor to the president on the West Wing staff right now?
African American?
Yes.
I would say that, well, first of all, you're totally not covering the fact that our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and world-renowned
I'm asking you about the White House staff. I'm asking you about the people the president is with every day.
Look, this racial polarization is not good for the Republic or the Republican Party. And it seems to be getting worse as what was once proudly known as the party of Lincoln becomes the party of Trump. And that's your reality check.
All right, John Evelyn, thank you. Up next, the CNN exclusive, a teenager accusing the Mayo Clinic of medically kidnapping her. The story behind that shocking accusation is next.
A Safe Flight Auto Blast.
The accusation is shocking. The world-famous Mayo Clinic medically kidnapping a patient. Yet one teenager accuses the hospital of doing just that, keeping her there against her will. CNN's Elizabeth Cohen is live at CNN Center now with more for us this morning. Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning, Erica. Alyssa Gilderhus was 18 years old when she says the Mayo Clinic saved her life and then wouldn't let her go.
Alyssa Gilderhus and her family say they experienced the seemingly unthinkable. In this email to police, Alyssa's mother says her 18-year-old daughter was medically kidnapped by the world-famous Mayo Clinic.
Do you think they were trying to medically kidnap you?
Yes, I completely do. Not a doubt in my mind.
This was Alyssa on Christmas Eve in 2016 with her family in Sherburne, Minnesota. On Christmas Day, a blood vessel burst inside her brain. She had emergency surgery at the Mayo Clinic. Doctors gave her a 2% chance of surviving.
How did those neurosurgeons do?
Fantastic. Phenomenal.
They saved her life.
After a month, she moved to the rehabilitation unit at Mayo with new doctors.
When you had opinions or thoughts about Alyssa's care, did they listen to you? No.
I don't feel they did at all.
Did they seem annoyed with you? Yes.
Because we were parents, not the doctors, because they knew everything and we didn't.
The tension eventually exploded, and Mayo kicked Alyssa's mother out of the hospital after they say she interrupted a meeting. In a statement, Mayo told us family members may be restricted in situations where care may be compromised or the safety and security of our staff are potentially at risk. Alyssa's mother says she didn't do either. Alyssa begged for her mother. Family friend Joy Schmidt.
She cried. Was that tough?
Very.
Alyssa says she'd finally had enough.
Did you want out of the Mayo Clinic?
As bad as possible, yes.
But what happened next is alarming. Alyssa and her parents say Mayo wouldn't let her go.
Did you ask to have her transferred to another hospital?
We did.
And what did Mayo say?
They said no.
A lawyer even wrote this letter asking for an expedited transfer to another hospital.
It felt like you went from a healing place to a prison.
So Alyssa's parents hatched an escape plan. They pulled a trick on the staff to get her out of Mayo, and they documented it on video. They told them that Alyssa's grandma Betty had come to visit, but was too frail to come inside the hospital, and so Alyssa had to come to her.
Quick.
But when they arrive at the car, there's no Grandma Betty.
Come on, babe.
It's Alyssa's mother.
Going home.
Watch as a nurse's aide grabs Alyssa's arm.
Yes, she is. She signed out. Come on, honey, we're going home.
How did it feel the minute that you hopped into your parents' car?
Like a relief. Like the biggest weight on your shoulders pulled off. It was phenomenal. The longer I'm away from Mayo Clinic, the better.
After Alyssa left, Mayo called 911 and said they'd had a patient abduction. But Rochester police tell CNN that Mayo was wrong. They said Alyssa was 18, an adult making a legal choice to leave the hospital.
That there was no abduction, there was no violation of law. Essentially, you had a patient that left the hospital under their own planning with the assistance of family members.
Months later, Alyssa and her family learned a secret while looking at police records. Just before Alyssa escaped, a Mayo social worker had tried to get court orders for emergency guardianship for Alyssa.
If you had not gotten Alyssa out of the Mayo Clinic, where do you think she'd be right now?
She would not be in a good place.
I think it would have been the end of us ever getting to see Alyssa again.
So why was Mayo trying to get emergency guardianship for Alyssa? A county official told police that the Mayo Clinic was concerned for the medical decisions being made for Alyssa. Alyssa signed this privacy release form so Mayo could speak freely to CNN, but Mayo wouldn't answer our questions on the record. We will not address these questionable allegations or publicly share the facts of this complex situation because we do not believe it's in the best interest of the patient and the family. Our internal review determined that the care team's actions were true to Mayo Clinic's primary value, that the patient's needs come first. We acted in a manner that honored that value for this patient. Alyssa and her parents think Mayo was trying to get guardianship in retaliation for questioning doctors. Alyssa is now 20 and she will start college next month. She says that despite everything that happened, she will always be grateful to the Mayo Clinic for saving her life after her aneurysm. Erica?
Wow, Elizabeth, that is quite a story. Thank you. We are following breaking news. Let's get right to it.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning. Welcome to your new day. It is Monday, August 13th, 8 o'clock in the East. Allison off. Erica Hill joins me. Let's get right to the breaking news. This is an oh my moment. The President of the United States recorded by one of his own aides the day after that aide was fired. Omarosa Manigault-Newman just released new audio to NBC News of a phone call that she says she had with President Trump the day after she was fired by Chief of Staff John Kelly. Listen to this.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody,
Wow.
You know, they run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
God damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
This comes as Omarosa also released a secret recording of her conversation with John Kelly the day he fired her. That meeting was inside the White House Situation Room.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? Is the president aware of what's going on?
Let's not go down the road. This is a non-negotiable discussion.
I don't want to negotiate. I've never had a chance to talk to you, General Kelly.
Yeah,
so if this is my departure, I'd like to have at least an opportunity to understand.
We can talk another time. This has to do with some pretty serious integrity violations. So I'll let it go at that. So the staff and everyone on the staff works for me, not the president.
And the New York Times news, North and South Korea announcing plans to hold another summit, this time in Pyongyang next month. South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un expected to meet a third time since relations began to thaw in April. Details for the upcoming summit being hammered out this morning.
Defense Secretary James Mattis is sending one of his 3-star generals to assist Saudi investigators in Yemen after a deadly airstrike killed dozens of civilians, including 40 children on a school bus. It is believed to have been carried out by a U.S.-backed, Saudi-led coalition. The UN says it was the worst attack on children since Yemen's brutal war escalated 3 years ago.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro now says he is willing to accept the FBI's help to investigate an apparent assassination attempt. In a televised speech last night, Maduro also asked President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo what they were going to do with the terrorist groups that were involved. Maduro accuses Venezuelan opposition groups of masterminding the attempt on his life and claims the financiers and planners live in Florida. While the U.S. has indicated it will cooperate with the investigation, CNN is unaware of a formal FBI offer.
New security questions after an airline worker steals a plane from a major airport. The chief question, of course, how did this happen?
This is not a bed. It's a revolution in sleep. The new Sleep Number 360 smart bed from $9.99 intelligently senses your movement and automatically adjusts, so you wake up ready to train for that marathon. And now, save up to $500 on select Sleep Number 360 smart beds. Ends Wednesday.
All right, I brought in new Max Protein.
To give you the protein you need, with less of the sugar you don't. I'll take that.
30 grams of protein and 1 gram of sugar. New Ensure Max Protein and 2 great flavors.